Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm really excited to introduce our speaker today, Professor Huaizu Jiang from Northeastern University nearby. Huaizu is right now an assistant professor in Curry College of Computer Science at Northeastern University, and he was a postdoc at Caltech and research scientist in NVIDIA, got a PhD also nearby from UMass Amherst. So he's been local for a pretty long time. His work is mostly on 3D multimodal cues, and you're going to see a lot of very interesting work in this space. When I was starting my PhD or my research journey, I started with 3D. It was too hard for me. My very first paper was actually on 3D. I feel that's not my field. It's too hard. So I switched to machine learning. But now I'm really looking forward to maybe coming back a little bit and see if we have some common interests and collaborations moving forward. So thank you again for coming, and let's welcome Professor Jiang.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for the kind introduction. I'm very excited to be here to this, in this very nice building, gorgeous riverview. So today I will be sharing our lab's research on generating and populating 3D and indoor scenes. So, if I do not make anything clear, feel free to interrupt me. I'm more than happy to have like an interactive session. And just a reminder, probably you have to speak to a microphone in order for your voice to be captured by the system. All right, so, the reconstructing or capturing or reconstructing, rebuilding the physical world in a digital form, or in modern terms like creating digital twins, is a grand goal of computer vision. So, for example, like if you have your cell phone held wandering somewhere, for example, in your apartment, and you like to rebuild your apartment in a digital form, right? So, this is a very classical setting. And turns out it's very hard because a lot of issues, or a lot of things to consider. For example, you like to capture the geometry of your apartment. By that, I mean like what's the shape of your chair, right? What's the shape of your couch, so on and so forth. And also like semantics, right? What are in your apartment, right? How many chairs, like chair number one, chair number two, this kind of stuff. And also like materials, right? You may have a wood floor or some other materials, right? So then, in the created digital twin, they would look differently. And also lighting condition, right? So your apartment will look, differently from daytime to nighttime, right? So this kind of stuff. And also physics, right? So, those kind of objects or instances that do not exist in isolation, they have, rich connections to the surroundings. So for example, if you, somehow like knock a mug onto the floor, right? Something may happen, right? This kind of involves some like physical understanding of the 3D world or physical world. And because of the so many like complicated factors, this is a notoriously hard problem. And the people have made constant progress in this direction. So for example, right, this famous system called CoMap, the idea is we have multi-view observations of the scene. We can use like underlying geometric principles to recover the camera, positions, like where those cameras, or where, in which orientation those images were captured. And then you can do some kind of like dense reconstruction. By reconstruction, I mean like build on top of your visual observations of the physical world, right? And recently, the community has been witnessing some very exciting breakthrough using some like implicit representations like NeRF or 3D Gaussian splatting, right? So now more and more high quality photorealistic rendering is possible. And our lab also made some like tiny contribution in this direction. So here, given a video taken by your camera, by your cell phone, say, shown in the left, we can recover those planar surfaces in 3D, like ground floor, wall, your table surface, like what I'm showing in the right. So this is all about reconstruction. Like I said, reconstruction is based on your observations, existing observations of the physical world. By observation, I mean like some videos, some images, right? And now there is a kind of like paradigm shift, or a little more exciting stuff going beyond the reconstruction, which is like hallucination-like generation. So for example, in the left, I'm showing an input image, just a single image, right? So you only have access to that single image, and you like to guess what it looked like from a totally different view angle, or complete opposite view or opposite angle of the input, right? So you can guess. You have to hallucinate based on your prior knowledge what this particular object may look like, right? Or the input could be a very simple like description, like we call it textual prompt about the scene. So for example, for this one, the prompt may be like a raccoon wearing astronaut holding a helmet in the hand, right? Something like that, right? So this kind of stuff, they do not exist in the physical world, right? It's pure hallucination based, right? So that's what I'm trying to differentiate from like traditional reconstruction to generation, right? And also our lab had recent work about like, giving a single image. We can convert this image to a moving 3D object, right? So, for example, this camel is moving, in 3D, so we can have some direct access to the 3D information, right? So what I'm trying to say is going beyond, traditional reconstruction, there are some like very exciting progress made in generation, right? So in today's talk, in the first part, I'll be sharing some progress from our lab about converting a floor plan. For example, you may have worked with a designer for your new home, and before they, really invest something to build your apartment, you can, have a guess like what this apartment may look like, what your new home may look like, right? So this is the first part of my talk, right? And then you may ask, well, what's the point of creating digital twins of the physical world, right? Either from some like floor plan or from some like some videos or images, right? One useful downstream application is like AR, for example. Based on the reconstructed planar surfaces, we can insert something that didn't exist in the physical world, right? We can augment the digital world. For example, a lot of cubes falling off. Because we know where those surfaces are, for example, I know in this place in 3D, there is a surface of the couch, so when those cubes fall off, they should not penetrate. They should remain over there, no matter how your view angle changes, right? That thing happens in 3D, right? So that's about one way from reconstruction to augmentation, right? And another very important application is about populating the digital world, right? So, like what we humans have done in the physical world, right? We build different tools, different buildings to make our life easier. So, probably in the digital world, right? Simply having some empty apartments, some buildings is meaningless, right? We like to have some virtual humans, some like digital peers for us, So, a very important downstream application is how to populate the digital world so virtual humans can have meaningful interactions with different objects, say, picking up a mug, have, interactions with other static parts, for example, laying down on the couch, and even have, meaningful interactions with other virtual humans or even with, the physical world, for example, to have a conversation with you, right? So with that, in the second part of this talk, I'll be talking about our lab's effort about generating humans motion with some controllable signals, and also how can we generate virtual humans that can have interactions with some like object or something like dynamic objects, right? So these are three topics of today's talk. So I'll mostly focus on the first two, and depending how much time we have, I'll allocate the more time for the third part. Right? Again, if you have any questions, feel free to stop me. I'm more than happy to chat. So with all of this research, you can imagine there will be a lot of exciting applications, right? So for example, for therapy, right? Imagine we can generate some like cozy room where you can talk to a virtual human without worrying about privacy and other issues, and also for gaming and entertainment, right? So, just to enhance your experience, and also sports, right? So imagine what if you can, hire a digital Messi to teach you how to play soccer, right? Or, whatever sports store that you can think of. And also e-commerce, right? So for example, I like to, I'm a company, I have made some very cool stuff, some products. I like to showcase to people how we can, use this stuff, right? So we can, have some like virtual demos by hiring some virtual humans to do that. And also for robotics, right? So for our robotics friends, we can build a simulator. We can have some virtual humans to demonstrate how for some certain skills or some tasks, right? So with that, let's get started from the first part about generating a scene from a floor plan, right? So recently, in terms of generation, there have been some very exciting progress in the community, especially because of the development of diffusion models. So I'd like to briefly review how diffusion models work, right? So we have some, initially some clean signals. So for example, it can be a 2D image, right? By clean, I mean it's a naturally sharp, perfect image, right? And how diffusion models work is, in a forward direction, we add some noises gradually to the image, right? So each step we add a little noise to it. So for example, like what I'm showing here, in between of the process, you will see some noises, typically Gaussian noises, into the image. And after T steps, we'll see a completely non-recognizable image full of noises, right? So that's the forward process. And then there is a denoising process. So for this process, the idea is I like to gradually remove the already added noises, right? So like what I'm showing here, but the problem is in the forward process, because we choose to add those noises, we know what are the form of the noises. But now in the denoising process, because the noises and the original image are already mixed together, right? There's no easy way to separate them. So typically, we use them like parametric models, for example, deep neural networks, to learn how to remove the noises from a noisy image and gradually until after another T steps in a reverse direction to get a final clean image, right? So this is how diffusion models generally work. And in some cases, we may have some extra input like a textual prompt. For example, a user may say a dog is sitting on the bench, right? So we like the generated image or denoised image. After removing those noises, the image should look faithfully to the textual prompt, right? So really, what we need, the model once the diffusion models are trained, we start from a pure Gaussian noise and gradually remove the noises until the end we have a clean image. Right? This is how it works for image generation. And here we're talking, and for this parametric model or deep neural network, we can use UNet or other transformer model. Right? So in order to generate a 3D scene, you may say, oh, we can simply replicate the success of the 2D diffusion models to this 3D domain, right? So for example, what I'm showing here, in the left, we have some noisy voxels. By voxels, I mean some cubes existing in 3D, right? There, you can imagine we can partition the entire space here into a set of cubes, right? In an analogy to pixels on a 2D image plane. We start from some noisy voxels, and we gradually remove the noises in them until the end we have a nice existence of a 3D scene. For example, this is the geometry of an apartment or a house, right? And on top of that, a designer can choose to texturize, add some appearance. Oh, for this couch, it should look like brown. For the ground floor, we can choose to use wood, something like that. But the problem is, for this kind of 3D or native 3D generation or 3D generative models, the 3D data itself is harder to acquire than 2D images, right? So for 2D images, now we have a powerful camera in our pockets, right? But for those 3D data, it's really hard to acquire or sometimes even impossible to acquire, for example, like those voxels or those cubes, right? They cannot be directly captured by any device, right? So this native 3D generative model is not that promising, partially because of the limited data, right? So alternatively, people have investigated using 2D models to help to facilitate the 3D generation. So for example, in the left, I'm showing a paper where they use 2D images to generate images, like pretending we have a camera moving in an apartment at each location, what this apartment at this location should look like, right? And gradually when we visit the entire house, we can have a reconstruction of the 3D scene. But the problem is, like what I'm showing here, the geometry or the layout of the generated scene is not that good. This is because when you generate or when you incrementally visit different locations of the scene and then generate the apartment, there's no constraint saying this place should be similar to that place so that the entire scene is coherent, right? So the coherence is an issue. And in the middle, I'm showing another work, but there are two issues. One is they require some 3D proxy room. What do I mean by that? So they require a designer or a user to specify, oh, in this room, there is a bed. It's like 3D shape is roughly like this, like a box, right? So first of all, this kind of 3D proxy room is not that easy to get, right? A second, it only focuses on the single room generation, right? Having a single room exciting, but that's not enough. We like to have an entire apartment or entire house, right? And in the right, I'm showing another work that starts from a 2D layout, similar to the floor plan I'm going to talk about. But they also choose to focus just on the single room generation, and they have no explicit 3D output, right? What do I mean by that? The model can only give you like some images or imagine some pictures taken at different locations in the room. They cannot directly tell you in 3D where the position of a bed is, right? That means you need some additional effort to get that 3D information so that later you can have some like augmentations, for example, putting something on the table, on your couch, on your bed, right? So these are about some exciting existing stuff. So what we're doing is we start from a floor plan similar to the 2D layout, but this floor plan is about the entire scene, about the entire apartment. And then with some, with the help of 2D diffusion model or generative models, we can, reconstruct or generate the entire scene in 3D. So, for our work, it's about house scale generation. There may be multiple rooms, right? In one scene, probably 2 rooms. In another one, probably 5, right? And also, we have explicit mesh output. That means in 3D, in exactly 3D, the existence of a bed, so you can have easily have interactions with the generated scene, right? And you can also port those generated things into some existing tool chain like Unity, Blender to facilitate downstream application development. So how can we do that? Technically, we have a location or a floor plan to start with. In this floor plan, we know okay there is a bed over here, there is a couch over here. What do we do? In the first step is to partition, is to have a location graph, right? So here, each node means at this location, we're going to generate some images, pretending there was a camera over there. Let's get a sense what the room, what the house should look like at that particular location, right? And then different locations are connected together because when you generate images or have observations of the scene at nearby location, you can imagine there will be some overlap, right? This kind of overlap in the generated images provide us with strong cues to reconstruct or to rebuild the entire scene. Right? Make sense? Any question? Yes?
So why do you have some red dots?
That's what I'm going to talk about right now. So red dots means we are going to visit those places, those nodes, gradually, autoregressively. Because why? Because you can imagine in a single scene, there may be too many nodes to visit or to process at the same time, right? So processing all of them simultaneously is just too computationally expensive and also subjected to hardware constraint like memory. So you cannot do that, process all of them at the same time. So what we do is to process or visit those nodes batch-wise. Let's visit this 2 red nodes initially, and once they're processed, let's move to their neighbors, so on and so forth, until we exhaust visiting all different nodes. Right? So at each step or at each batch, when we get to the red dots, we generate some RGB, I mean like those colorful images, depth images that tell us for a particular object how far it is away from the camera. Right? I'm going to elaborate this more very soon, but for now, in the right, what I'm showing is some like point cloud, right? So, projecting those generated images in 3D. So I know at this location in 3D, there should be a red color, belonging to, I don't know, like carpet or something like that. Right? So this is for one location. And like I said, we visit different locations incrementally or autoregressively to generate all those, observations, right? By observations, I mean colorful images and depth images. And then what in the right, I'm showing like basically stitching them together. So we have a global point cloud view. Right? So you may wonder, at each location, at each step, or at each batch, right? How can we generate the images for those two red locations, right? So what should the apartment or scene look like? How do you get those information, right? So that's what I'm going to talk about. For these two red locations, right? Suppose you're going to place a camera to get a sense about their appearance, what they should look like, what are the images, about, right? So recall, we are doing like a incremental generation. We visit those nodes in a sequential manner, right? So by the time when we visit those red nodes, that means we have already processed the blue dots, those blue nodes that I'm showing here. And for those blue nodes or those locations, we have already generated some images, right? In the top, I'm showing some RGB images, right? You can see like some couches on the ground floor. This is like in the living room, right? And in the bottom, I'm showing like depth images. So here, blue means that particular object in the particular image is closer to the camera. And yellow means it is far away, right? So we have depth and RGB images, right? So how can we, borrow information from this blue nodes to help us generate the images in red nodes, right? So recall we have, powerful 2D diffusion models. Like what I said earlier, this, 2D diffusion model, they start from pure Gaussian noise. And after seeing a lot of images, billions of images crawled from the web, they have very strong, powerful prior about what this, for this particular pattern of Gaussian noises, it should correspond to this type of image, right? So technically in our setting, this 2D diffusion model takes some reference images, those images from the blue locations, right? Because those are some neighboring locations in the scene, right? When we generate red images in the red locations, they may cover the same scene, the same portion in the scene, right? So the images in the output should be similar or should be faithful should be coherent to this reference images. At the same time, we know, okay, at this location, there should be, let's say, a couch, a stool, or something like that, right? So the layout, the 2D floor plan, can also provide us with information to guide the generation of using the 2D diffusion model. Right? So on the input side, we have two types of information. One is RGBD images from the reference locations, those blue nodes, and also the layout around those red locations, because we know in this red location there should be a couch, there should be a bed, something like that. Right? With that, we can generate the RGBD images in those red locations. Right? So we finished one for loop, right? Given already generated in images in those blue locations, we can generate images in red locations. And then we can keep doing this for the next batch of nodes, right? So those blue nodes, those red nodes will become blue in the next batch, and we will visit some new nodes until we finish visiting the entire graph. Make sense? This kind of autoregressive generation. Yes? Yep.
First is like when you're seeing the reference image, like are you using that just by like warping, like from the previous view, and use that as a like not black area in the imprinting process, or you are using some like control net or SD edit to use it as an actual guidance?
Short answer is similar to control net, but not exactly as it is. So we basically fine-tune the model to take the latent representations of those RGBD images and to generate those, target images.
I see. So did you like during this process, did you add like the style consistency like a constraint to make sure that like in this like iterative process you have the same style?
Very, very good point. A main challenge when we try to generate, the images at different locations of the scene is how to maintain the consistency. Like I said, here I may only have a partial view of this room at this location, right? So probably, the ground floor is yellow. When I look at the other part of the room, the ground floor, the color of the ground floor should remain the same, no sudden change, right? How to maintain this kind of global consistency? We have two ways to ensure that. First of all, we have the guidance of the layout. We know this part, the red part and the blue part, they're nearby. So in generated images, they should have some like similar appearance, right? The other is this kind of 2D diffusion models, right? We have the guidance from the reference images as well. We tell the model, look, we have generated images of the scene that have this particular stuff in it, in its neighboring locations. This stuff probably should still be there.
I have another question, which how do you ensure the like geometry or like camera pose consistency? One most common cases I have experienced is that your ground may be not flat. Like when you are try to like rotate the camera horizontally, and you find that the ground is actually maybe a little bit like not that flat. And when you do this, like you will find that the ground go to the sky finally.
Yeah. So here, when we generate the graph, right, we have full control about where to gather those images, gather those virtual observations, and at which orientation, at which view angle to get those orientations, to get those observations. And we didn't find much difficulties of, let's say, maintaining a flat floor. The model, probably because we have the depth information, because depth tells us the geometry of the scene, right? So probably that helps. But in this model, we didn't see significant difficulty of maintaining, let's say, having a flat ground floor.
Oh, so it's like you generate the depth map first, and then use that to guide the imprinting process.
Yeah, we generate RGBD at the same time, and we use both of them to guide the next generation of the next batch of RGBD. So RGBD in, RGBD out.
Oh, got it. Thank you.
Any other question? Yes.
Can you elaborate on the layout condition? Is it how the red box is positioned?
Yeah. So here it requires some like technical details. I'm going to describe it in a high level sense, but I have some illustrations I'm more than happy to show you after the talk. So basically, the generation of a location is dependent on the orientation or the view angle of the camera, right? So what we did was to transform that local view of the floor plan to the local coordinate system of the camera, so that from that particular angle, the layout should look like this. If I watch it, if I gather the observation from different view angle, the floor plan should, look like this in those RGBD images. That's roughly how it works. And we have some, models to get some latent representation, and then it's all subject to the model to learn from data. Oh, for this type of information, this certain pattern should appear in output. Yes. Yeah, that's a very good point. So recall at the beginning of this generation, like what I'm showing here, right? So here, that means for this two red dots, right, they have no reference images because that's the beginning of the entire for loop, right? So here, technically, it means we have no existence of those reference images. So the model has some sort of freedom to generate whatever it thinks that should be faithful to the layout. We still have the layout guidance, but we do not have those reference views, those observations from neighboring locations. Yes.
Are you training one single
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good point. So, yeah, yeah. So we have a single layout for this entire generation task, right? So this layout can take different type of floor plans, different like configurations of the spatial layout, and to generate different images. So in short, a single model. Yes.
For your graph, how do you generate the nodes and the edges?
Yeah, so we use some heuristics. We find where the space, the empty space, or for example, if there is a bed over here, we probably should not place a camera that is very close to the ground floor because that will be inside the bed, right? So first we find those empty spaces and then partition those empty spaces using some like certain like space between two neighboring nodes. And then basically we use some heuristic to construct the graph. Okay. One more question? Yeah, sure.
One final question. How does this relate to sort of the product that I forget which company does this, but like a Redfin or something might have a digital walkthrough of a house. Cello might have a digital walkthrough.
Yeah, so that.
And I think they probably take real images, maybe just also get information. How does it?
Yeah, so the input of two systems are totally different, right? For that system, it's similar to what I talked about at the beginning. It's about reconstruction. We have some observations of the real world to start with, because you have to have a camera to take those images in the first place, right? Here, we do not have those information at all. You can simply sketch a floor plan, right? Just in your mind. You may, for example, here I'm having one floor plan, but probably later you change your mind and I do not want to have a bed over here. I want to move the bed to a different place, right? You can easily do that without actually taking those images, right? And our model can take just the floor plan itself and hallucinate what it should look like and convert it into a 3D model. Okay, so I'm going to move forward. I'm more than happy to chat after this talk. If you're interested, say, knowing more technical details, right? So this is what the observation or generated images look like at two different batches, right? Those blue nodes and red nodes, right? I project them into 3D so we can see their relationship more clearly. So for example, here, within this blue circles, right, you can see in both the generated images in two batches, we have the observations of those two little stools, right? Or inside this green circle, we have the generated images covering the same wall area, right? So we have some guidance from neighboring locations to help us generate those images at new locations, and then we repeat this process, right, until we finish visiting all the nodes, right? So this is the idea. So I'm going to, and after getting this newly generated RGBD images, so we can merge this into already partially generated scene, right? So the generated scene will become larger, and we can repeat this process, right? Visiting more red nodes, right? Until at some point we traverse all entire graph. So this is how it works, right? This is the final point cloud. And with this RGBD images, we can use some existing approaches like TSDF fusion to convert those 2D observations into a 3D model, right? So I'm showing a rotated mesh of the scene here, right? Those shadows are added by the visualization tool, right? So this is how we do it. And I'm going to show you more results. So see in the left, right, this is a different floor plan. In the right, that generated the scene in 3D. Or you can see the existence of bed, those couches, the table. And here's a different one. So it's house scale. The entire thing may have different rooms, right? So we have two things to ensure the consistency in the generated image, right? One is the guidance of the floor plan. The other is like the guidance for neighboring location, right? So here I'm showing some comparison with existing approaches, right? So in the right is what the output of our model. In the left, this is an existing system that can take textual descriptions of the scene, right? We cannot have apple-to-apple comparison because two systems basically take different type of input, right? So what we did was to convert the floor plan into some textual descriptions and generate the scene. So we can see, without the help of the floor plan, right, the generated 3D scene, the geometry is not that good. It's really hard to see a high-quality 3D model, 3D scene over there. Okay, so of course this model, still have some limitation. I'm going to quickly mention some of them. Right. So first of all, the quality of the scene is not that, close to what we may capture using some cameras. Right. So how can we improve that? And also, right now in the generated images, we have entangled the geometry, texture, material, light condition all into those RGBD observations. Right. But later you can imagine with this generated environment, what if I want to insert a lamp over there? What does the scene look like, right? So we need some kind of disentanglement. Or more ambitiously, how can we, develop a generative simulator to help, development of embodied AI to have a co-evolving, simulator and the embodied agent. I'm more than happy to talk about this after the meeting. So now I'd like to switch the gear to talk about, after getting this environment, right, how can we populate the environment so virtual humans can have meaningful interactions with the scene, right? Like I mentioned earlier, this is an illustration how the diffusion model works, right, for image generation. We can also repurpose it for human motion generation. So here, we still start from some Gaussian noises, but those Gaussian noises correspond to different variables, right? And we can still use some parametric model like neural networks to denoise, to gradually remove the noises and until we have some meaningful sequence of human joints, right? So here, the output are a set of human joints at different locations, at different time steps, right? Suppose we have, let's say, 5 human joints in each frame, and we generate a video sequence of 10 frames, right? So we have 10 by 5, 50 output in total, right? So this is how it works in analogy to image generation, right? And of course, this model can take some textual prompt as input, right, to describe the content of the motion sequence, right? For example, like a person walks, right? And some, in the community, some researchers has taken the initiative to generate some promising results like this one, a person kicks. Let me show it again. This is, the prompt is simply about runs, right? Person runs, right? The results look very promising, but they may not be sufficient in practice when you want the agent or you want the virtual human to have interactions with the surroundings, right? For example, in some cases, you like to control the movement of the virtual human, or probably you're a game designer, right? You want the character to move in some certain ways. For example, like moving in, following this S shape, right? Or you want to, moving like this, or you want the virtual human to go to reach the chair and then sit over there, right? So you want to control the destination or of the motion sequence, right? So all of this constraint, of course, you can say, well, I can describe this kind of constraints in the textual prompt because that's what the existing system take, right? But the problem is this kind of spatial constraints may not be precise or not even possible to describe precisely in language, right? What we're doing here is to say, in addition to take a textual prompt as input, we can additionally input some control signals, for example, the trajectory of the S shape, telling the positions of in the generated results, the positions of the pelvis of the person should follow this trajectory, right? It can be dense, like the S shape, or it can be sparse, like the surface of the chair, right? So how can we do that? The idea is, let's say this is the generation at one particular time step, right? Different human joints, their locations in 3D, right? At the same time, we may have some control signals, right? For example, like this blue dot telling the model, look, in the generated results, the joint of the wrist should be at this location, right? So how can we encourage the model to output something that is close to the control signal, those blue points, right? The idea is very simple. We can compute the distance between the model's output and the user input, right? So this distance tells us how good or how bad the model's output is, right? Similar to the loss function. And R here is a conversion function about, coordinate system conversion. And then with this, error signal or distance signal, similar to how we, do to train the deep neural networks, we can, update the model's output to minimize this distance function, right? Similar to what we do with, gradient descent, right? Exactly the same. We can update the model's output because model is a parametric model, right? We just need to update, the model to make model's output close to the user input, right? So, and gradually we can, close or decrease the distance. We can do this multiple times, right? Similar to what we do with SGD for deep neural to minimize loss function, right? And until at some point, it is very close or, almost perfectly aligned well with the input with the control signals, right? And here, this definition is so simple that it can be applied to different, joints in output, right? For example, for some reason, the user may simply specify, well, in the first time step and in the last step, for a particular joint, their location should be at this place, right? Or it can be, for the same joint, but densely specify their location, right? Can be sparse, can be dense, or combination of them, right? I like to control the position of the shoulder and also the hand at the same time, right? We have the flexibility to do so as long as we can compute the distance for each joint, right? And then all we need is to update the positions of the model's output to get them close to the user input, right, to those colorful points, right? So that's the intuition here. So if you're familiar with the term of diffusion models, they can be interpreted as classifier guidance, right? So what's the classifier here? It's the distance function. It's a score function telling us how good or how bad the model's output is to some desired output. Here, by the desired output, I mean those control signals, for example, the S-shaped trajectory from a user's input. So we can do this and then compute the gradients and do it multiple times to update the model's output. And this, guidance or this classifier guidance, or sometimes people call it perturbation, is applied both at the training stage and the inference stage. So this is what it looks like in a high-level sense, right? So in the top, it's a regular human motion generation model, right? It's a generic model. And our approach can serve like a plugin module that can be integrated with any model, right? But the problem is, you can imagine, in some cases, the user's input may be too aggressive, that it is far away from the model's output. Right? Imagine now I like to reach a bottle that is slightly far away from me, right? For the diffusion model, if we just choose to update the model's output to minimize the distance, because we have no constraint whatsoever for the model's output, right? So the model may generate actually long arm simply to reach that bottle. But what would we human do? We probably would bend over or move closer to it. That means even if we just want to control a single joint, for example, the position of my hand to reach that bottle, we implicitly control other joints, our human body together. Right? So that's what we do. But the problem is, how can we define the control signals for the rest of the joints? Because from the input perspective, we have no such information, right? So how can we do that? We're going to do it in a feature space, in embedding space. We let the model to learn from data, right? So if you're familiar with ControlNet, this is the inspiration we borrow. So the idea is, this is an illustration of how the model works, how a human motion generation model works in detail, right? It takes some textual prompt and have some transformer layers or self-attention, and until the end we have some clean motion, the positions of those joints in 3D, right? So what we can do is we have another module that takes the spatial control signal, those trajectories as input, and at each after each layer, we train a model to provide some like residues in the feature space. Like I said, we do not know explicitly how can we control the rest of the joints, because from input we have no such information, right? But we can choose to do it in the feature space, in the latent space, and let the model to figure it out from the training data, right? And we can repeat this process until we process all output of those intermediate layers, right? So in the top is a regular human motion generation model, right? In the bottom part, it's a new module, it's a plugin module. We choose to provide some correction or feedback in the feature space, right? With that, with both the spatial, which explicitly controls the position of some certain joints, and the realism guidance that controls all other joints implicitly in the feature space, right? We can get more, authentic results. For example, here, the textual prompt is like a person plays a violin with their left hand in the air and the right hand holding the bow, right? So this is the output without any control signals. The model only takes the textual prompt as input. So we can see the motion is somewhat faithful to the textual prompt, but it completely ignores the control signal, the green circle, right? With the green circle, what we like to see is the person plays the violin while walking, following the green circle, right? And this original model cannot do that. Let's say if we add this spatial control signal where we explicitly decrease the distance function, what we can see is like this. It can perfectly follow the circle, but the results are not faithful to the textual prompt, right? What if we choose to use the realism guidance, we learn the model, to follow the input in the feature space, right? It somehow can still, understand the textual prompt to play the violin, but it doesn't follow the control signal well. If we combine both of them, we can see like this, right? It reasonably follows the textual prompt and also moves along the circle, right? I'm going to skip this for the sake of time, and here are some visual comparisons, right? So in the left is the result without the spatial control signal at all. So we can see the person, the virtual human, completely ignores the control signal. In the middle is a result from a existing model. At the beginning of the generation, the human can follow the trajectory, but in the end, it drifts away, right? And in the right is our result, so the model almost perfectly follows the control signal, right? Like I said, our system can control any joint at any time. By time, I mean at different time steps, right? In the first frame, in the middle frame, or till the end of the generation. So for example, for some reason there is a low ceiling in the scene, and for this person to walk through, they have to bend over. So we can control the position of the neck and also the hand or the wrist to avoid some obstacles over there. So let me play it again. Right, so we can see, by providing this actual control signals of two joints at the same time, the person can, follow them. And also, the control signals can be sparse. For example, pretend there are two cups over there. The person walks over to it and pick them up, right? We control two positions, but only provide sparse signals, right? And then you may wonder, what if we provide some extreme control signals, right? For example, what I'm showing here, right? This person walks following some spiral signals in 3D, right? So we can see this person can follow the control signals well, but it may not understand the surroundings well, right? It looks like the person is climbing up and down in the air, right? Pretend it seems like there were like some stairs in the bottom, right? So this is a extreme example of our system. Of course, this system may also have some limitations, right? Let me show this result. The control signal is the position of the cup, right? So we like the person to walk to the cup and pick it up, right? So what's the issue? Let me show it again. The issue is at the beginning of the generation, the motion of the human is natural, right? Slowly walks toward the cup. But when it is reaches the end of the generation, or when the hand position is close to the cup, the motion suddenly becomes slower, right? Slowly reaches the cup, right? As if the person was having some difficulty. This is because limitation of the formulation, right? Recall in the illustration I was talking about, we assume a fixed length of the motion sequence. We always assume to generate, let's say, 10 frames at a time. But you can imagine for some certain motion, we just need like, say, 5 frames, or for some other motions, we may need like 50 frames, right? So this is a limitation of this system, or a plain diffusion-based system, right? And another issue is, for a human to have interactions with an object, we have to provide those control signals in advance. The model itself has no clue about what the surroundings look like. Right? So this is one issue. For the sake of time, I'm going to quickly go through the third part, that we're going to address the second limitation, where we let the model to learn automatically how this virtual human can interact with a dynamic object, where the position of the object or the controlling point may vary from time to time. Right? So how we do it, if we like to generate interaction with humans and objects at the same time, it's extremely difficult, because even for a box, it may have different appearance, right? It may have different shape or size. So what we choose to do is to make it slightly simpler by providing the system with this 3D object model. And we assume it's rigid. It won't deform, right? As a result, we only need to care about its location and orientation in 3D. We do not have to worry about generating this object along with the human motion. Right? By the way, the hole on the box is from the 3D model itself. Right? We do not generate the object. So how can we do this? Right? How can we generate the motion of the human and also motion with object at the same time? Right? Well, you may say we can have two different models, two different diffusion models. One is responsible for generating human motion. The other is responsible for generating like the motion of the object, right? That's a natural approach, and also we tried that, right? So this branch is a model, diffusion model for human motion generation. This branch is for object, right? If we put them there independently, they have no information exchange. As a result, you can imagine the results will be bad, right? So naturally, we add some cross attention to exchange information between two models, right? It's very simple and very straightforward. And in the end, we get human motion sequence in interaction with a particular object, right? So this is what it looks like. Okay, let me show it again, right? So you can see it works reasonably well, right? So when the person moves, the object also moves along. But the problem is, they do not form a meaningful interaction, right? Why? Because in order to grasp an object, the person would have to have contact with the object, right? The object cannot itself float in the air. So that's the issue, right? We like to not only to have the object to move along with the human, but also they have some meaningful contact, right? And you can imagine this contact may vary from one interaction to another type of interaction. For example, here I'm showing the results of gripping or holding. But what if the person would like to sit on the box, right? The contact part, or how a person may have a contact with the object may be different, varying from one problem to another, right? And turns out this is a very difficult problem. And what we did, similar to the previous approach, we designed a score function to tell us how good the generated human motion and object motion, are, how well they form a meaningful interaction, right? More specifically, how can they have some, contact information? So, to compute this score function, we need some. Oops, I'm going to skip this. To compute this score function, we need some actual information about how a human can interact with the object, right? For example, for a box, a person can sit on it, can kick on it, can hold it up, right? There are different ways to have contact with that object. So we choose to train another diffusion model. I'm going to skip it for the sake of time, sorry about that. to train a different model to give us probabilistic output of the contact, because in this sequence a human may choose to even for the same interaction, let's say sit on, right? This time a person may sit at one location of the box, but for a different time the same person may choose to sit on different location of the box, right? So we like to have some like probabilistic output of the contact. And by the way, this affordance estimation is a fundamentally challenging problem in robotics. People have been working on it for quite a while. So we are hitting a wall other people are seeing, right? So in short, we're still using the classifier guidance of the diffusion models, to enforce the model's output human motion, object motion to form some coherent interaction. Right? So for the sake of time, I'm going to skip a lot of slides. Just want to show here. So in the first two columns are existing approaches, right? So before we started working on it, no existing work chose to work on this text to human object interaction. So we had to repurpose their approaches. And in the right is the generation results of our approach with the ecommerce. I'm going to skip this as well. So this is after the classifier guidance, how the human can interact with or can hold or grip a large box. Right, we can see it works better than the very initial model. Right? Well, still a lot of issues. I'm going to quickly mention them. One is the contacting estimation or the affordance estimation in general is very difficult. Right? A second, here we only model the joints, right? But you can imagine people's shape are different. Right? In order to have meaningful interaction to avoid those penetration, we need like to have more information. Right? And third, here we assume the interaction or the contacting point between the human and the object is constant. What if a human is playing a basketball? Right? The contact may not be always there. So that's an issue. I'm going to skip this. I'll quickly mention we have a ECCV paper where we can generate stylized human motion. So for example, the prompt is a person walks forward and then sits down. And this sequence is about style, right? What the style of the motion looks like. And by combining the textual prompt and this style motion, right, the person moves with this arms stretched and then sits down. So summary, I've talked about a scene generation and then how to generate human motions with context-aware cues. Right. And the code is available on our lab's GitHub webpage. The 3D generation model, the code will be released. We hope we can release it by the end of October. And with that, all this hard work were done by my amazing students, and all this work were done in collaboration with other collaborators. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, thanks for the great talk. At some point you said that 3D images are hard to come by because we don't have the capability to capture them in our pockets.
Yeah.
But I was curious if that was changing. I guess some cameras now have depth sensors directly, and then also there's been this, like people have these live photos where the photo moves around a little bit, and maybe you can do some kind of 3D reconstruction from that. And I was curious if you think that will change in the future.
Sure. So you mentioned two ways of capturing data. One is with some capturing of depth information directly, right? So first of all, those devices are kind of more expensive than regular RGB cameras, right? So for example, LiDAR devices, even if we have that on some like state-of-the-art cell phones, the actual captured data is very, very sparse, probably only like a few points.
I see.
Over the entire. So still that's a bottleneck. And second, what was second? So like live photos, right? Those kind. I mean, though underlying information are still about 2D. If you like to recover 3D, you'd have to do something smart to convert those, multi-view observations into 3D.
Yep.
Hello. I read some paper about like generating realistic scenes using differential models, and there is a common problem is that you are hard to control the numbers of like object or contents, and you are using the
Floor plan.
Floor plan. Yeah. Seems that will be a more dense a guidance for those stuff. But I was wondering how well your generated content align with your floor plan. Will it generate every object in your floor plan?
Almost. So let's say if we specify a bed over there, likely you will see a bed, although the quality may not be always the best, right? And so in our experience, the faithfulness to the input floor plan is pretty good. We have some content numbers in the paper, right? So in short, it's pretty good.
Yeah. Then a quick question is that when you're generating every single patch or perspective view, are you inputting the full floor plan as a guidance or not?
So we choose to use, technically we just use a local view, or we do not use the entire floor plan because some of the information may not be useful for local image generation.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Sure. Yes.
And you start the loop. Just the first batch it only use the layout as the reference. But what if the first generated RDBG images are not making sense?
Yeah, that's right. That's a very good point. So theoretically it does have the risk of failing in the first place, right? In practice, we do not see that almost no at all. So because we train the model to follow the floor plan, so we may see some issues like the color may not be always consistency, but like I said, the faithfulness to the floor plan is generally pretty good.
Oh, okay.
Any other question? Yes.
If you take different walks through the graph, I guess initialize at different spots, do you find a large diversity of generations or not really?
Yeah, so diversity sometimes is desired because you like to have different appearance even for the same layout, right? But in some cases you like to preserve the same appearance between different runs, right? So our model is kind of in between. It's the generated results is not that diverse, but you cannot guarantee the generated images look the same or the generated scene looks the same simply because the nature of diffusion model, because you start from randomly sample noises, right? So depending on your starting point of the generation, you may end up having different look or appearance of the scene.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you for the great talk. So I have several questions about the technical detail.
Sure.
About the first part, scene generation. So I was wondering how do we obtain all the graph about floor plan and all these nodes, the nodes in the graph.
It's hard to describe within a short amount of time, but in a high-level sense, we first of all find out where the empty space is in 3D. Those empty spaces are locations where we can play the virtual cameras, right, to generate images. And after we find out the empty space, and then we partition the empty space using some equal spacing to have, let's say, at this location, let's generate some images. At a neighboring location, let's generate another another set of images. Right. I have some slides. After this talk, I'm happy to show that for you.
Okay, thank you. And another question is that we mentioned about we input the reference RGBD images and let diffusion models to generate the target images. So what's the camera pose or camera view about these images.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
we define them previously or just let models to generate for freedom?
Yeah, very good point. So in a generation, we have full access to the camera poses in both the reference views and target views. What we did was to fuse the camera pose information in the latent representations of the images. So for both the reference and target, so the model can be aware of the 3D information, so that the generated images are faithful to each other in those overlapping regions.
Okay, so just like we encode the camera view information into the
or more specifically the camera pose.
yeah, okay, thank you.
Do we have more questions from the audience? I have a quick one about the evaluation. Reconstruction versus generation, to me, maybe reconstruction even is harder problem, but easier to evaluate. Generation, I don't know, maybe it's easier problem, maybe harder, but it's pretty hard to evaluate.
Yeah,
How
that's
do
right.
you run the evaluation?
Yeah, that's a very good point. So I skipped one slide. So typically people exactly like you said, for generation, you have no specific ground truth, right? So, let's say given the same layout, in different people's mind, they may look differently, right? So there's no single ground truth. So as a result, you cannot simply say compute the distance between your generated result with a particular ground truth. That's not feasible, right? So what people usually do are two things. One is to treat the ground truth, a set of 3D or images, as one distribution, and the model's output as another distribution, and then we compute the difference between two distributions, not instance-wise distance, right? So that's what one thing people usually do. The other is like user study. So we hire people to perceptually check which one has higher quality than the other.
If no, I will continue to indulge myself. Second question a bit about the self-driving scenes. You mentioned 3D data hard to get. There are a lot of 3D data public available from like self-driving companies. How do you connect basically the research outdoor and the research for indoor scenes?
Yeah, that's a very good point. So first of all, in this year's ECCV, there's one paper about generating outdoor, but in terms of LiDAR points. So they do not care about appearance, they do not care about what they look like. They generate scenes of those LiDAR points when a virtual car drives through, right? So that's one thing. Second, to unify tasks tailored for outdoor versus indoor is very challenging. Very challenging task simply because the domain gap between them is too large. Some people are working on that, but I guess it's very challenging. So people usually focus on outdoor or indoor alone.
Great, thank you.